Tonight, we're going to look at the American conservation movement and how the arts have influenced it. That's my presentation. So, without too much more about what that's all about, just know that that's our main topic for tonight. And I'll elaborate on that as we get a little bit later into the roundtable for tonight. So, um, we're going to have our safety moment next. Michelle Bierstedt has prepared that. Then we'll go into the main topic tonight, the conservation movement in the arts. And then, of course, as always, our announcements and our closing, and then the open discussion at the end that we always do before we close out the meeting. So to start with, please follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 2. And then the Scout Oath. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country and to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. And then the Scout law. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And finally, the Outdoor Code. As an American, I will do my best to be clean in my outdoor manners, be careful with fire, be considerate in the outdoors, and be conservation minded. All right. And then we will turn the time over to Michelle for our safety moment about nature photography.
Yep, it seemed appropriate given the topic for tonight that we talk a little bit about photography. We all like to take pictures, but it seems like anymore we need to make sure that we're being careful when we take pictures, not only for our personal self to practice leave no trace, but also for some safety on top of that. Next slide, Matt. So watch the ground. No matter where you are or what you're taking photographs of, be sure to watch the ground. It's not uncommon for photographers to walk forwards and backwards with a camera to their face, trying to get the perfect shot. But if you don't keep an eye on the ground, you may find yourself getting injured. When you start to photograph, be sure to sweep the area visually. Take a mental note of dips, holes, edges, especially edges, so that you don't potentially walk into anything unfortunate. Make sure you do your research before you go out. What kind of animals live there? What do you need to look out for? Are you going to an exotic area? Are there any venomous, poisonous things such as snakes or insects to avoid? Do you need protective clothing of any kind? Check information about sinkholes, sudden cliffs, or other hazards that may spring up in your landscapes. Next slide. And of course, our leave no trace moments. Respect wildlife. There's a lot of things to think about when photographing landscapes and nature. And as a photographer, it's common that you would just focus on the creative points. Take care of your safety, however, and ensure you return to take many more photographs in the future. So keep your distance from wild animals. It's best to use the telephoto lens and stand as far away as possible. We all remember our rule of thumb. Goes even further with photography because with a camera up to your eye, you don't necessarily know if it's coming towards you or not. It's possible that animals could be attracted to your camera, could damage you or the camera. Whether you're dealing with lions or elephants or even that nice little cougar sitting in a tree, make sure that you're watching it. It's best to play it safe and keep your distance. Do not pet the fluffy cows. Next. Leave no trace and minimize your footprint. Wildlife photography is about capturing the beauty of nature, but the irony is that photographers can sometimes be the very thing that damages it. Stick to established trails. Don't disturb or move natural elements. Let's talk about waste. Pack in what you bring in, even the biodegradable waste like fruit peels or fruit scraps, which can introduce non-native bacteria and attract animals to areas where they shouldn't be. Feeding wildlife disrupts natural behavior in ways that most people don't realize. They're meant to hunt, forage, and scavenge on their own. If I have to alter the environment to get the shot, I'm in the wrong place. The best wildlife photographers aren't seen or heard, they're simply there, capturing moments as they unfold. With that, that's our safety moment for tonight.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, we will go on to the main presentation for tonight. I'm going to need to switch some slideshows up here. All right, is everyone able to see the what I'm sharing right here? Is everyone good? Okay, sounds good. All right, so this is a presentation that I have shared at the National Outdoor Ethics Conference a couple of times, but it's actually a presentation that I use in some of the college courses that I teach. I teach humanities at a university here in Utah called Utah Valley University. And humanities is a broad topic. It's generally focused around the arts and culture and things like that, but it also branches into obviously environmental topics and just all kinds of stuff. And so one of the units that I teach in my class is about how the arts influence the American conservation movement. And now I've titled it American Wilderness, the Geography of Hope. That's taken from a piece of literature that we're going to look at later. But we're going to explore how various artistic movements have influenced let's say, have influenced American culture and have driven it towards kind of a wilderness ethic, let's say, in many ways. So let's see, I'm going to try and drop this out of the way. Do you have, is there a black thing across the screen now? Zoom's kind of weird and hopefully not. Actually, let's move this up here. There we go. Sorry, just trying to get everything arranged how I want it to be. Okay, so we're going to go back to the start in the 18th century, so the 1700s, so we can get an idea of what's going on. Now, we're going to view this through the lens of Western arts and Western society and how it develops over time. Now, in this particular humanities class, it's called Humanities Through the Arts. It's a global section, so we spend some time in Western history. We look at Eastern history. We look at stuff across the globe. But in order to understand Western culture, or artistic culture and philosophical culture, we have to understand that a lot of stuff looks back to the ancient Greeks and what they did, classicism, or it rejects that. The pendulum kind of swings back and forth between those two kinds of things. Now, the 18th century is what we would call the period of Enlightenment. And just as an aside, I know I'm speaking very quickly because this is actually a combination of several class periods, and this usually takes anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours to cover, and I'm trying to be cognizant of our time limit tonight. So I've cut some things out and I may go quick on some things. So, but the Enlightenment is an era when people looked back at the Greeks a great deal more. They were more interested in things that had to do with order, symmetry, rationality, and things that weren't so much focused on, let's say, emotional expression. And so at the turn of the 19th century, there starts to be a growing movement that rejects these kind of things. Now, nature in the Enlightenment era was a topic of a great deal of focus, but it was more through the lens of, well, the scientific revolution happened during this time. And so looking at nature was, well, how can we explain it? How can we classify and order it? It's from this time is where we get kind of the Latin classification system for the names of the scientific names of animals or classifying the elements or things like this. And all of these scientific discoveries lead to the Industrial Revolution. Well, the scientific and the Industrial Revolution have some consequences. If you look at this painting right here, this is a painting of what London looked like at the end of the 18th century. Doesn't look like a very nice, clean place to live. And that's because it wasn't. Now, the Industrial Revolution made people's lives a great deal better. It brought about mass production, changes in technology and transportation and things. But as people move more to these urban places and start to work these long hours in the factories, their perceptions of things start to change. They start to think back on, oh, I wish I lived back on the farm. I wish I lived my rural lifestyle again. Things were so much better. I wasn't breathing coal smoke all day. I wasn't working, 14 hours a day in these dark factories by candlelight. My time was my own, and nature was beautiful. Nature was it starts to be viewed as, instead of just a source of raw materials or something to be categorized or explained, but as a place to go for healing, as a place to go for a respite from the urbanization and the industrialization that has taken over the world. And all of this kind of nostalgia for the outdoors, for pre-industrial civilization, leads to a new movement called Romanticism. And this is what's very, very important for the kind of the foundation of the American conservation movement. Looks like there we go. Sorry, I scrolled back to that. But people began to view nature a little bit differently. They also began to kind of reject a lot of the stuff that the artistic and philosophical world of the Enlightenment stood for. Order and symmetry. Instead, people wanted things that were real. They wanted things that were chaotic and asymmetrical, things that replicated nature. People were reacting against these living and working conditions that were created by the Industrial Revolution. And nature became idealized as opposed to just simply objectively analyzed. So as Romanticism progresses, these are some of the things that come out of this aesthetic movement. The idea that art can be produced for art's sake. Throughout the history, up until this point, throughout the history of Western arts and Western culture, if you were an artist, it was very likely that if you wanted to make any kind of living whatsoever, you had to have a patron. You had to work for a nobility. You had to work for a church. You had to be associated with any of those kind of things. And the art that you produce as a result was generally not stuff that was made to express your own viewpoints or your own aesthetics. It was made to please the king or please the clergy or please whoever you worked for. But things change in the 19th century. Now this is where we start to put artists on a pedestal and make and kind of elevate them as these, let's say, superhuman individuals that are in touch with the divine, and bring these artworks that are deeply personal and meaningful into existence for the benefit of society. We see the rise of individualism for this same reason, and placing more value on things that are irrational. We're rejecting the rationality and the emotionless logic, the logos of the Enlightenment era. There's more of a focus on nostalgia and spontaneity, longing for the past, longing for a pre-industrial, less civilized world, let's say. And people swing the pendulum towards favoring emotional expression or extremes of emotion and contrast in their art. In the artwork that we're going to be looking at, we'll be looking at a lot of visual art, including photography. So Michelle was spot on for picking that as our safety moment for today. And we'll look at a lot of literature as well and see how that changes people's views and helps them or inspires them. One of the main things that Romanticism brings about in the arts is a change to the focus on the power of nature over humanity. So this generally gets translated as a big focus on landscape paintings as opposed to portraits or depictions of historical and or religious events. In the history of Western art up until this point, most of the art that's produced does one of those two things: portraits or historical slash religious events. But in the Romantic era, we break away from that and we start portraying nature in a much more central way. Before, it's just kind of the background doesn't matter. Whatever the people are doing in the painting is the main focus. But in the Romantic era, it swaps. And if we have people in a painting, they're much, much more subdued. They're not the point, because we want to show that nature has power over humanity. Humans are powerless to do anything against the power of nature. And then there's a couple other big buzzwords that we'll get into. The idea of the sublime and the transcendent. There's a focus on the supernatural and the spiritual, or even sometimes the occult, that occurs during the Romantic era. In fact, like the genre of horror comes from the Romantic era. The first horror novel, Frankenstein, is written in the 19th century. And it's because Romanticism is very much about emotions. We want the viewer or the reader or the listener to feel deep, passionate emotions, as opposed to simply being awed by the logic and the order of the art that's created. Now, in the United States, this manifests itself in the idea of manifest destiny and westward expansion, which we'll get to in just a second. So now that we've looked at kind of the groundwork or laid the groundwork for what Romanticism is, let's look at some of the actual artwork and see how it shows itself there and how that affects the course of the conservation movement in the United States. So the first thing we need to talk about is the sublime power of nature. Now, when we talk about something that's sublime, there's a lot of things that kind of come up to your mind, possibly. If you have a meal that's sublime, or you have a sublime experience, it's hard to put into words. It's something that is so good and so deep that it's hard to express adequately. And that's what the Romantics like, because it's very vague. The more vague it is, the more mysterious it is, the more attractive it is. And so there are some that try to explain what this means. Here's one definition of what the sublime means. Oh, hold on, there we go. This is by Sir Edmund Burke. He says, "The passion caused by the great and sublime in nature is astonishment. And astonishment is that state of the soul in which all its motions are suspended with some degree of horror. In this case, the mind is so entirely filled with its object that it cannot entertain any other." Well, that's kind of an interesting definition. Astonishment, horror, like how is something that is fills me with a degree of horror a sublime experience? Well, let's take this picture, this photograph for a second. I actually took this photo on the last day of a 50 miler with one of my scout troops back when I was a scoutmaster a long time ago. And I woke up, it was probably about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I walked out to the lake to gather some water, and the sun was just rising to the east. And this is facing towards the west. So the sun is rising in the east, and it's starting to touch the tops of these peaks right here. And as I sat there and looked at this scene and looked at the lake, how smooth it was smooth as glass, a perfect reflection. This was an experience that was so deeply meaningful and powerful to me that still to this day, I kind of have a hard time putting in exactly what it means into words, which is where the photograph then comes in, because this photograph can express more of that moment than I could possibly say in all of my words. I could, I could try to explain this photograph with you, but without seeing it. But because you're able to see it, you can kind of get a sense of how astonishingly beautiful this was. Now, the horror thing, we'll get to that in just a second, but there's also a sense of, let's say, intimidation at the power of nature, because these mountains are massive. At any moment there could be an earthquake and they could collapse upon me, or there could be a storm and blow me away, or it's just that feeling of being minimized against the power and majesty of nature. But in any case, like it says here, in this case, the mind is so entirely filled with its object that it cannot entertain any other. And so, this is the same reason, to relate it to this horror again. This is the same reason why people go to horror movies, right? I don't know anybody that goes to horror movies for the fantastic dialogue and the great story writing, right? That's just not a thing. You go to get scared out of your pants, right? You go to feel a visceral emotion, to feel something. That's more what we're talking about right here. Is it's a deep, visceral, moving emotion. And as many of you know, if we are going to get people to care about nature, they have to feel something about it. And this is where we're kind of starting to lay the groundwork for how art influences the desire to conserve and preserve nature, because it ignites something inside of people. Well, let's start with an artist. This rather intense looking fellow here is a German artist, Caspar David Friedrich. I'm going to go through this really quick, but he's important because he is the guy that sets the romantic trend for landscape art. He is the type, the example. He's the one that painted this, the Sea of Polar Ice. So if we look at this painting right here, if you want, you can put some stuff in the comments, but think about, let's say this is the era before the camera is really adequate and able to do things or portray nature and reality as it is. But let's say you have never seen a place like this and you look at this painting and you go, wow, like, are there places like this in the world that exist? Look how like sharp and inhospitable this place is. This is both at the same time engrossing, but also a little bit terrifying. And you can see, does anyone see any evidence in here of the power of nature over mankind? Well, if you look closely over here on the side, we have got a ship that has been crushed by the ice right there. And this is where that horror kind of comes in. If you think about it, anyone ever passed like a horrific accident out on the highway, right? Our natural inclination is to go, oh, I want to see what's going on. Whoa, that's pretty awful. It's kind of the same thing. It draws us into this. We become emotionally invested because we see some evidence here that we can't really do anything about the power of nature. We can't look away. It's incredible, and it's also like, just, I mean, it's sublime. Now, another painting by him, the Abbey in the Oakwood, this again gets more into kind of the supernatural and the mystery kind of feeling, like what is going on, what happened in this ruin. There's maybe a little bit of nostalgia there for a bygone era. What was the story of this? Or what are these shadowy figures that are entering into this place? And we see like a little bit of a graveyard right here. There's that horror in it as well. The colors are very subdued, but there's a great deal of contrast between light and dark, but it leaves you with this eerie feeling. That's the point. But what Friedrich is more known for is paintings like this. This is perhaps the defining Romantic era painting. It's called Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, and this is painted by Friedrich in 1818. Now, there's some interesting things that are going on in here. As I mentioned briefly earlier, most paintings up to this point were depictions of historical events, especially from Greco-Roman history, or religious events, things from specifically the Bible, the Old and New Testament. And the people were the specific focus. Now, we have a person here, but what's different about this person? If you think about it for a second, this person is anonymous. Their back is turned to us. We don't know the identity of this person. And that's because they're not the point. The point is the vast landscape that's behind the figure that has his back towards us. We're supposed to want to come and join this figure. He's inviting us. Look at the opportunity I have, to be in this place and look over this beautiful landscape. You want to come up and stand right beside him and go, wow, look at that. Look at those massive rock formations out there. And there's a little bit of mystery to it. There's this mist that's covering up stuff down in here. Maybe there's like ruins down in there. Maybe there's bears. I don't know. It's a little bit scary. It's mysterious, but it's overwhelming, and it's beautiful, and it's all engrossing. And we want to be there. We feel an emotional connection to this. Now, this figure right here is also meant to create a sense of scale. It's called a Rücken figure, or a back figure. Same root word as like a rucksack for your back, a backpack. So he's here only to give a sense of scale about how vast this landscape is compared to him. Here's another example. Morning landscape at the lake. Again, look at the vast mountains here. And it's also showing the pastoral lifestyle. So if you're trapped in London working in some smoggy factory for 12 hours a day by candlelight, producing widgets endlessly, you're wishing you could go back to the lifestyle like this that your parents led or your grandparents led. It doesn't sound so bad after all. I want to go back and live the pastoral lifestyle. Herding cattle out in the mountains doesn't sound so bad when you're stuck in the factory. But again, our little figure right here, they're anonymous. Doesn't matter who this person is because they represent all of us. And they represent our desire to be in this situation and to be out here. We're evoking nostalgia as well. Nostalgia for the past, nostalgia for a pre-industrial or non-industrial lifestyle, and an outlet here in the past, or an outlet here in nature. Nature is being revered as opposed to subdued. Now, this whole Rücken figure idea catches on. I could show you a whole bunch of other Friedrich paintings. In fact, I will a little bit briefly, but the point is, we still do this in the 21st century. We do this all the time. I know a lot of you probably have an Instagram account. If you've ever gone through social media, through your Instagram, and in fact, at this point in my class, I play a game where we do what's called Friedrich or Instagram, where we look at an image and we determine whether it's something that came off of Instagram or something that came off, or that Caspar David Friedrich painted, but we don't have time. So I'm just going to kind of compare that. So for example, look at this comparison right here. We've got a Friedrich painting over here on the right of two figures overlooking this beautiful landscape where we have some lakes or perhaps the sea out there. There's a sunset, perhaps some mist and clouds and mountains. And then look at the image on the left. Has anyone ever seen anything like that on your social media? I'm going to bet that yes, absolutely you have. And it's for the same reason. These people are influencing you, influencers, right? To say, look at me. Look at how amazing this landscape is and how lucky I am to be here and to look out over this beautiful place. Again, their backs are turned to us. They are Rücken figures, but they're doing the same thing. They're enticing us to enjoy the landscape, to enjoy nature. They're also putting it into perspective. So again, here on the right-hand side is a Friedrich painting of a person in the woods. And those woods seem kind of dark and foreboding a little bit, but they also surround this figure and make it feel very, I mean, I guess there's kind of that horror element to it, right? There's mystery to it. There's intrigue to it. There's, it feels like nature has all power over this individual. On the left is another Instagram photo, and it's kind of the same. It puts things into perspective. Nature is this giant, force, and yet here we are, and we have the privilege to enjoy it, but nature has power over us. Here's some more, kind of very similar, right? Oops, sorry. Friedrich is on the right, and we've got another Instagram photo on the left. Rücken figures. And then here's another one. Here's our wanderer above the sea of clouds. And then here's a 21st century example of a wanderer above the sea of clouds. So we still do this in the modern era, but the trend starts. The influencer, nature influencer trend starts in the early 19th century with the Romantic era. So this desire to be out in nature for purposes other than survival or obtaining raw materials begins. The desire to, well, hike and camp. In the 18th century, like hiking and camping weren't really a thing. You had to get from point A to point B, and as a necessity, you probably had to do that, and so you wanted to get it over as quickly as possible. But this is another interesting side effect of the Industrial Revolution, because people now live in these urban areas. They want to escape this. They want to get to nature. And so hiking and camping for recreation purposes starts to become a thing in the 19th century. Well, let's come over here across the pond now to the United States and see how this shapes up here. So the United States in the early 19th century is a pretty brand new nation. And in the artistic world, the great question is, well, how do we distinguish ourselves? And it's not just the artistic world, it's in just about everything, but how do we distinguish ourselves and justify our existence as a new nation? How do we distinguish ourselves from Europe instead of being just, Great Britain Junior or one of the colonies, right? What is it that makes American art? What is it that distinguishes the United States? And this is a question that a lot of artists are struggling to answer. And when I talk about artists, I'm talking about everything: visual art, literature, music, sculpture, all of that put together. Well, many of these artists kind of come to a similar conclusion, and that is the thing that differentiates the United States at this time from Europe is wild, untamed nature. Now, Europe, that's not to say Europe doesn't have wild nature and beautiful vistas and things. It certainly does. But because industrial society has been present in Europe for many, many, many years, there's almost nowhere you can go in Europe where you don't see the hand of mankind in some way, shape, or form. But in early 19th century America, you look to the West and it's endless trees, vast, unknown land out there. Industrialized society has only touched a very small sliver of this continent. And so this creates a sense of optimism. It creates a sense of uniqueness that we have here in the United States. The nature that we have is not just beautiful, but it is wild. It is untamed. Thomas Cole, one of the famous artists that we'll look at in a second, he says, though American scenery is destitute of many of those circumstances that give value to the European, still it has its features, and glorious ones too, unknown to Europe. The most distinctive and perhaps the most impressive characteristic of American scenery is its wildness. Very important characteristic, its wildness. DeWitt Clinton said this at a meeting of the American Academy of Arts in the 1840s, I believe. He said, "Can there be a country in the world better calculated than ours to exercise and to exalt the imagination, to call into activity the creative powers of the mind, and to afford just views of the beautiful, the wonderful, and the sublime?" There's our favorite word. "Here, nature has conducted her operations on a magnificent scale. The wild, romantic, and awful scenery is calculated to produce a correspondent impression in the imagination, to elevate all the faculties of the mind, and to exalt all the feelings of the heart." Well, in this romantic sea of emotion and chaos and irrationality, the American landscape seems to fit all of those things. It's sublime, it's wonderful, it's grand, it's romantic, it's all there. And so the artists jump on that. They jump on that. And this idea of wilderness, so not just nature by itself, but wild, untamed nature, begins to shape not just the American arts, but American culture in general at this time. And people start to think a little bit more about, well, what is our relationship to nature and wilderness? Now, in the United States, there's kind of two channels of this that compete. They overlap sometimes, but sometimes they're the direct opposite of each other. And as we talk about where the arts go and manifest destiny and westward expansion, we need to keep track of both of those channels. So we're going to kind of jump between these. Now, the first channel of thinking about our relationship to nature comes through the romantic lineage. Those that are looking at the sublime power of nature. There are many in the 19th century that find something very religious about nature. We find God in nature. There's a turn back to spirituality. And this is where we have folks that view nature as a place to go and find spiritual renewal, as a place that has more intrinsic value than simply just raw materials. Now, interestingly enough, this kind of comes from the urban centers. Many of the artists and the writers that are in this channel over here are in New England or in New York, Boston, in cities that have been built up and are very urban. And it's because they live in these urban areas. They have the desire to go out and experience nature as it is. It also happens to be because they have disposable income and they're able to afford to take excursions. But they write and create art along this channel. And that influences one way of thinking in American society. Now, the other side of this equation is over here on the right, the pioneering kind of spirit. And that this is more focused on these subjection or the subjugation of nature. These are the people that live in the rural areas, that live on the frontier. That idea of the frontier is what begins to define American society. But they're the folks that their livelihoods depend on, their very survival depends on whether or not they can plow a field and cut down the trees and grow crops for the next year. So now these two kind of butt heads. In fact, these two views still butt heads in the United States from time to time. And once in a while they overlap with each other, but these are very, very important views of nature. Now, in our day and age, you've probably played both the Web of Life, but also the ethics game in your training. From the romantic side of things is where we start to get more of a biocentric viewpoint, whereas on this pioneering side of things is more of an anthropocentric viewpoint. Nature is still there, like it's beautiful, it's exciting. The draw of the wilderness is fantastic, but at the end of the day, the exciting part about it is that we get to exercise our dominion over it, or our power over nature. We get to use it and overcome those challenges, and form civilization out of the raw materials of nature. Well, let's follow some of these currents and see where they go. We're going to start on the romanticism side here and look at a particular brand of American romanticism. It's called transcendentalism. Now, transcendentalism is all about the transcendent or the it's beyond words. It's beyond. It's like having an out of body experience, but something that is so beautiful and so unique and so powerful and above all else that it is hard to describe. And the chief source of transcendent experiences goes back to nature. And it comes from the writing of these two gentlemen right here, Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, who I'm sure many of you have heard about. Thoreau goes and builds a cabin in Walden Pond and lives there for some time and talks about how living with and in nature affects a person and changes your personality and your attitude. Ralph Waldo Emerson is he's a Unitarian minister, but he finds that even that restrictive. It's not exactly what he's looking for, but what he does find is he finds he for himself, he finds spirituality, he finds God in nature. And that's what he begins to write or form his philosophy about. And as these two gentlemen give lectures and writings and things, they begin to influence a movement of people that view nature again as more than just raw material. Here's some of the things that they said. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, "In the woods, we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, which nature cannot repair." Nature is a place of healing, especially spiritual healing. And this idea starts to go forward. Henry David Thoreau says, "I wish to speak a word for nature, for absolute freedom and wildness, as contrasted with a freedom and culture merely civil, to regard man as an inhabitant or part and parcel of nature rather than a member of society." This is foreshadowing some other famous writings from people that we probably know. But we're taking ourselves now out of, well, simply people are just a member of industrialized or civilized society, but nature is a part of this community. We have to regard ourselves as a member of that society as well. We're part and parcel of it. If you think about the Web of Life game, one of the things that we oftentimes don't put in there, we have all of our natural links with trees and birds and mammals and all that kind of stuff. But think about how it would change our perspective if we had a human be connected to that, right? Because we always teach that at the end of the day, we are all connected to that. Well, Henry David Thoreau here is speaking a word for nature, starting us on that path to think about our connection to it. Now, in the art world, these three artists are called the Hudson River School, and they're the first big school of landscape painters in the United States. We have Thomas Cole, Albert Bierstadt, and Thomas Moran, and they have a particularly unique effect on the conservation and preservation attitude that starts to take shape in the 19th century. So here's a little bit of the artwork of Thomas Cole to start out with. This is one of his more famous paintings. This is the oxbow, specifically the oxbow, or it's a depiction of the Connecticut River Valley. And in here, we see all of the key ingredients of Romanticism. We see great contrast in light versus dark. There's a great deal of drama. So, for example, over here in this dark side, we have a departing storm. We see the destruction and the power that nature has in that it's broken off of these branches here. And on the right-hand side of the painting, we see light. It's a much brighter and more calm and serene a pastoral scene on this side. Now, you may have noticed also that David O'Leary says, yes, it's about 25 miles from where he lives in Western Massachusetts. Yes, I know some of you are very close to these places, which is fantastic. I'm sure it doesn't look like this anymore. I don't know. But we also have a contrast in civilized society over here in the light of civilization and industrialized society, right? Versus the wild and untamed nature on the left-hand side to the west, right? It's exciting. We look at these woods, these untamed woods, and we say, dang, I wish I could see what was in there. I want to explore that. I want to feel the power of the thunderstorm. Maybe there's bears in the woods. I don't know. Now, just as a little bit of a fun connection here, notice what we have right here. That's Thomas Cole himself, painting a painting inside the painting. It's our Rooken figure. It gives us a sense of scale. He's out here in the uncivilized side of things, but it gives us a sense of scale of how vast and powerful this is. He was fortunate enough to have just experienced this storm. All right. Now, the next one, Albert Bierstadt and Thomas Moran as well, these two get to do something very unique. They get to be part of the government survey expeditions that come out to the Western United States and map and survey the land that's here. Now, these were official parties that were sent out by the United States government to explore and research and like I said, map out what was out here in the West. And most of these parties employed an artist of some kind. So instead of taking photographs and whatnot, later on in the 19th century, it starts to become more and more photographs, but they would have an artist create sketches and artwork of the places that they visited that they would then send back to Congress and to show them, look at what we have, look at the resources that are out here in the West. And so if you look at a map of the West, you'll probably notice a lot of things are named stuff like Fremont or Hayden or Powell or Wheeler, those kind of things. And it's because those were the leaders of those survey parties that came to the West. Now, Albert Bierstadt and Thomas Moran become the official artists of several of those parties that come to the West. And they get to go to places like the Sierra Nevada. Now, I know we have folks here from California. Does the Sierra Nevada actually look like that? Well, yeah, yes, no. But here's where we get the romantic streak coming in. Albert Bierstadt is a romantic at heart. In fact, he's a German immigrant. He's trained in the romantic style. And so he's going to paint these paintings that are over the top. I mean, you can literally hear the angels singing as the clouds part and, divine light shining down on this massive valley full of waterfalls. We have a huge contrast in light and dark. The light, in the parting clouds on the ginormous peaks, whereas the darkness and the shadows over here in the forest and on the sides. It's meant to evoke an emotion. It's meant to get a rise out of you. That's what romanticism is all about. And that's a perfect tool to send back to Congress and say, and to the public and say, look at what we have in the West here. And Congress goes, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Wow. This is fantastic. We have such beauty here, and it starts to turn hearts and minds towards nature. Here's another one of Bierstadt's paintings of the Wind River Range in Wyoming. And it's the same kind of thing. We have the waterfall, we have the vast snow-capped glaciated peaks of just an inhuman scale, how powerful and amazing it is. We also have, and we'll see this a little bit later on, but down here in the foreground, we're romanticizing a pre-industrial civilization. The Native Americans actually become part of this romantic era thinking, idealization. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because if you know your 19th century history, it wasn't a pleasant time. for the Native Americans. Anglo-American society continued to push Native Americans out of their lands and do some really horrible atrocities. But at the same time, there was this idea taking shape called the noble savage. I know it's a very politically incorrect term, but that's what it was back then, because in Europe, when people were, I'm going to invent a term, nostalgicizing, it's a fun term, copyrighted, all right. They're nostalgicizing for the past. Their pre-industrial civilization was knights and castles and things like that. And so, in fact, a lot of the tales that we have from the Middle Ages are romantic retellings that have like a toe in fact, and like much more like in the romantic way, the legend is much better than the fact. So it's very elaborated. King Arthur's court, stuff like that. These are romanticized tales. Well, the United States, we don't have castles and we don't have knights and things like that. But the pre-industrial civilization that is here is the Native Americans. And so they get a little bit idealized at the same time that they're being horribly mistreated. Now here's another painting, Immigrants Crossing the Plains. So the 19th century is the time of westward expansion. Again, we have this wilderness out to the west that it gives us a sense of national optimism. You mess up in the east, you fail at business, your farm fails, anything like that. Guess what? Go west. In the west is opportunity. In the west is where you can make your living against nature. You can draw your living directly from nature. You can prove your worth. You can reinvent yourself. And so we see that sense of optimism in this painting of the immigrants heading into the light, into the west, the drama of that as well. And then there are others like Thomas Moran, who you may have heard his name before if you've ever been to a national park in the West, who gets to go to places like Yellowstone. And he's actually given a $10,000 commission by Congress to paint this particular painting as well while he's on this survey and send it back. And actually this painting hangs, I believe, in the Senate gallery currently to this day. But he paints this painting of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone and other paintings of Yellowstone and sends these back to Congress. Now, Congress has heard tales. There's this place where, the water boils and it's basically like hell on earth. And, there's these stinking mud pots and just like all of this amazing, unbelievable stuff. And some of them are like, I don't know. But Thomas Moran paints this painting and sends it back there. And they look at this and they go, oh my goodness, this is almost too good. This is almost too beautiful. And if you notice the date on the painting, you may notice, or you may remember that 1872 is a very, very important year in the conservation movement. 1872 is the year that Yellowstone becomes the world's first national park. And the thing that tipped the scales towards making that happen was the art of Thomas Moran, the paintings that he sent back. Albert Bierstadt also, his artwork was very important in influencing this idea. But the thing that finally turned the tides towards saying, well, we need to set aside some of these places as more than just raw material was in particular this painting by Thomas Moran, the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. Because people were just in awe of how amazing it was. It was transcendent. It was sublime. And perhaps this area is too sublime to utilize for nothing more than raw materials. And so the national park movement starts a great deal because, or owes a great deal of its existence to the artwork of Thomas Moran. So in many of the national parks, you'll actually see they have in some of the museums, they have places that are dedicated to the artwork of the park. So they have institutes that are, focused on creating art in the parks. And it's because that relationship goes all the way to the very beginning. Moran also gets to go to places like the Grand Canyon. In 1873, he paints this painting. And again, romanticism is there. It's meant to draw on your emotions, the contrast, the drama, the light and the dark. The departing storm is a very popular motif. Here in Utah, where I am, he paints this of Zion Valley in 1914, and Zion National Park is created in 1919. So he has a hand in showing these places to the general public, and them then falling in love with them and saying, these places are so beautiful, we have to do something to keep them around. We have to preserve the sublime. This national parks idea comes about in 1872. Well, let's look at the other side of the coin, because this is what is going to propel us into the 20th century and how things change up to the modern era. We'll start with this painting and poem. The painting is by John Gast, called American Progress. And the poem is Pioneers, O Pioneers by Walt Whitman. And it's just a chunk of the poem. It's not the full thing. But it says, come, my tan-faced children, follow well in order, get your weapons ready. Have you your pistols? Have you your sharp-edged axes? Pioneers, O pioneers. All the past we leave behind. We debouch upon a newer, mightier world, varied world. Fresh and strong the world we seize, world of labor and the march. We detachment steady throwing, down the edges, through the passes, up the mountain steep, conquering, holding, daring, venturing as we go the unknown ways. Pioneers, O pioneers. We primeval forest felling, we the river stemming, vexing we and piercing deep the mines within. We the surface broad surveying, we the virgin soil upheaving. Pioneers, O pioneers. Again, it's a very, very optimistic poem, but it's very anthropocentric, right? And it goes hand in hand with this painting, also from 1872, of American Progress. And we see some of the same romantic traits here, but in this way, they're more in the form of the pioneering, the subjugation of nature kind of viewpoint. Over on the right-hand side, we have the light of civilization, of industrial civilization over here. We have cities and towns and commerce happening. And as the angel of progress moves across the plains and into the wilderness, the vast untamed wilderness of the mountains over here, we see again steady streams of people, technology coming from the east, and pushing out both the people and the wildlife that were there before. Here we have, people upturning the virgin soil, or vexing the mountains with mines, or felling the virgin forests, stemming the rivers. Those kinds of things were seen also as American progress, as exercising our power over nature. And a lot of things are embedded in this side of the coin as well. The idea of the freedom to roam, the idea that to the west are these vast, and at that time was thought inexhaustible resources. There's unlimited potential. We look at the West and it just seems that there's no limit to anything that's out there. The trees, the minerals, everything. And so it's there for the taking. And so conquest and exploitation on this side become kind of the expression of romanticism here, in that we put ourselves against the power of nature and we overcome nature. So throughout the 19th century, these two ideas are competing. Now, it's not to say that people that were engaged in this kind of thing were not in awe from time to time of the beauty of nature. Of course they were. But again, remember, they're earning their daily life, or they're living in nature. They have to survive. They have to use it. Well, let's go then to this painting. This is from 1895. Now, the pioneer spirit gets wrapped up in a lot of people, like the mountain men, the cowboys, the pioneers, all those kind of things. And towards the end of the 19th century, these people become idolized and idealized through literature, through art, We still have people that reenact mountain man rendezvous or that live the cowboy life or things like that. There's that nostalgia kicking in. So we get this painting. This is by Frederick Remington at the end of the 19th century in 1895. We're going to come back and look at it again in a second, but there's something important in this. And that's because in 1890, the frontier, the thing that had defined American society for this entire 19th century, is declared closed. And it kind of takes the wind out of the sails of American culture because we'd been defined by testing ourselves against the pushing forward this frontier, this wild landscape, living on the edge of the frontier. These inexhaustible resources have kind of started to become exhausted now. There's nowhere left to go. This is brought about by, well, in 1862, privatization, the Homestead Act, where if you farm, a certain patch of ground for 5 years, the government will deed you 160 acres. It's yours. In 1869, technology improves. The Transcontinental Railroad is completed here in Utah, where I am. And now a journey that previously took weeks to get from coast to coast now takes a matter of days at a whopping 25 miles an hour. Can you imagine? And then this one, people don't often think about the invention of barbed wire. Whereas before this time, before privatization, before barbed wire, the legendary cowboys could drive cattle across the plains freely. The mountain men could roam. The Native Americans could roam. There was the frontier was never ending. You could always go where you wanted to go. That freedom to roam was there. But now, after the invention of barbed wire and privatization, all of these homesteads get fenced off, and it's gone now. The very lifestyle that we idolized is gone, and it now becomes a thing of nostalgia. And if you remember, nostalgia is a very important part of Romanticism. We now wish that we could go back and be like the cowboys, or we could go back and be like the mountain men. Well, that then brings new meaning to this particular painting, The Fall of the Cowboy. Because if you look at it, we're used to seeing romantic paintings that are very vibrant with their colors, right? Very dramatic, nothing subdued about this. And then we look at this. Well, okay, it's an autumn scene for sure, but their colors are just bland. The life has kind of been taken out of this, and it brings new meaning to this title, The Fall of the Cowboy. It's not just an autumn scene, but we're literally seeing the fall of the cowboy from prominence, the fall of that lifestyle, because these cowboys are now in a very quiet scene. They are, the snow muffles everything, but here they are maintaining the very thing that ended their way of life, this barbed wire fence. They're closing the gate on that. And so post 19th century, we began to heavily romanticize that Western way of life, both the people of it, but also the sublimity of nature. And so art changes, literature changes in a variety of ways. Now, art, this romanticization of the West, and especially the cowboy, is directly indebted to this guy, Frederick Remington, right here, who's not a Westerner. He's from New York. And how he created the myth of the American cowboy is he collaborated with an author named Owen Wister, and they published a series of articles in a magazine called Harper's Monthly called The Evolution of the Cowpuncher. And Owen Wister wrote them, and Remington was the illustrator. And they pretty much created this mythology, the romanticization of the American cowboy and that way of life on the West. For him, landscape is secondary. His work is much more anthropocentric. So again, if you look at this, the stampede, the focus is not necessarily on what's happening in the landscape. Obviously, the landscape is there, but it's the drama of what's going on with the cowboys, with the stampede. Yes, there's a storm. Yes, there's lightning. But you look at it and you go, wow, that would have been so cool to have been a cowboy. I want to do that. I want to go out and roam on the plains. Or like this, again, landscape, secondary. The people, though, are the focus of what's going on here. And speaking of people, again, these are these bygone era, the bygone people. So there's the cowboys, but also the Native Americans, again, become an object of nostalgia. Okay. We're in a way glorifying these lifestyles that have gone by, that are no longer what we have. And it kind of, like I said, it hurts a little bit. American culture now is backwards looking as opposed to forwards looking. And it's because the wilderness, the wildness of nature that we had in many ways has been tamed. This is the result of much of what that view that our resources were inexhaustible, that they were unlimited. This is what happened. We felled all of the virgin forests. The bison herds that were once inexhaustible have now been reduced to this mountain of skulls. We've vexed the mountains with our minds and extracted everything. And we started to realize that, sorry, I have to sign something for one of my kids. Hold on. Yes.
Sorry, guys.
There we go.
Thank you.
My kid wants to go to a camp. So, all right. But we start to realize that there are now consequences that are coming back to bite us. And so this other side of romanticism, of revering nature and its beauty, of looking at it as more than just raw materials, we start to remember this. And the artists and the writers and the photographers begin to document this and begin to, again, turn the American public, the public consciousness towards the fact that unless we do something different, this is all we will have. We have to save the remaining pockets of wilderness that we have, this thing that's defined us. So Thoreau it almost prophetically says this. He says, by avarice and selfishness and a groveling habit from which none of us is free, of regarding the soil as property or the means of acquiring property chiefly, the landscape is deformed and husbandry is degraded with us. And so a whole new group of writers and activists come about in the late 19th and early 20th century and begin to advocate through their writing, the literature, and through their artwork for the power of the sublime in nature, for reversing, some of these things that we've done and preserving what's left. One of the great conservationists that we all owe a lot to and that we know of is of course Theodore Roosevelt, who uses his office as president of the United States to forward a conservation agenda. The Forest Service is formed during this time. The National Park Service is formed a little bit after this in 1916. But we start to think about the ways that we treat and the ways that we use land, and how do we balance, our needs for raw materials, but also our need for something deeper, something more spiritual, something more transcendent. So Roosevelt, these are just a couple of his quotes. He says, "We have become great because of the lavish use of our resources, but the time has come to inquire seriously what will happen when our forests are gone, when the coal, the iron, the oil, and the gas are exhausted, when the soils have still further impoverished and washed into the streams, polluting the rivers, denuding the fields, and obstructing navigation." Oops, hold on. And then he says, "Of all the questions which can come before this nation, short of the actual preservation of its existence in a great war, there is none which compares in importance with the great central task of leaving this land even a better land for our descendants than it is for us." Now, from this push, we start to get this concept, and really starting in 1872 with Yellowstone, but we start to get this concept of public land. It's a uniquely American idea. If were in Europe in any time in the past, well, the land that if you wanted to hunt or hike or gather wood or whatever, there was some noble that owned it. And if you trespassed on that land, you could be punished severely for doing that. But here in the United States, the idea that this land belongs to the American people in perpetuity is quite frankly one of the best ideas that we have ever had. And it starts with Yellowstone. And at first, we didn't really know what to do with it. We'll set it aside and we're like, it's a thing. But we figured it out. And during Roosevelt's administration is when we really start to figure out exactly what we want to do with it. But we start to set aside forest reserves. We start to set aside other parks and monuments. And then, further areas beyond that, where you and I and everyone in this nation are the owners of this property. And with ownership comes responsibility, comes the hopefully the desire or hopefully caring about it and the desire to do something to preserve it for future generations, that conservation minded thing. Meanwhile, we have others that are writing and advocating, like John Muir, who says, everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and cheer and give strength to body and soul, very much along the lines of Ralph Waldo Emerson. When we try to pick anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. Does that sound like a game that we play? Yes. The clearest way into the universe is through a forest wilderness. Changing our mindset from we are simply here to exploit and use land and raw materials and nature for what we need to, we actually need it at a deeper level. And we need it because we're connected to it. Now, of course, the one that put this really into perspective is one of our heroes, Aldo Leopold. Now, if you have never read Sand County Almanac, this is as much a great piece of literature as it is a treatise on nature and the relationships that we have to nature. So this idea of the land ethic comes out of his writings, especially those in the Sand County Almanac. And he echoes some of the things that Muir said and that Thoreau said, but at a deeper level. The idea that we abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. But when we see it as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. So we're reframing it from this ultimately romantic idea of we are conquerors of the land to we are part of that community. And everything else in the landscape is kind of on an equal footing. There are other beings, there are other important components of this that we have to respect, or ultimately, yes, it comes back to bite us and we get things like that. A couple other Leopold quotes, some of which I'm sure you know, that the land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, or collectively the land. It's our neighborhood. In short, a land ethic changes the role of Homo sapiens from conqueror of the land community to plain member and citizen of it. It implies respect for his fellow members and also respect for the community as such. This begins to influence the way that we manage land or that we view our relationship to it. Here's a great one, considering where we've been. He says, man always kills the thing he loves. And so we, the pioneers, have killed our wilderness, the very thing that defined us for a century. Some say we had to. Be that as it may, I am glad I shall never be young without wild country to be young in. Of what avail are 40 freedoms without a blank spot on the map? Now, amongst all of this happening in the mid-20th century, there becomes a push for setting aside places that are more than just a forest reserve or a national park, which ultimately, national parks are geared to preserve, but also for visitation. Like I'm sure everyone here has been to a national park and there's hotels and restaurants and, that whole thing. But there needs to be places left like we had a century and a half ago, where nature can function on its own terms, where the web of life can be as intact as possible, where we can go and experience what it was like at that time. We need wilderness again. One of the great artists that was a strong advocate for some kind of designated wilderness was Ansel Adams. We talked about photography. I'm sure every single one of you has seen an Ansel Adams photograph at some point. If you've ever been to the dentist or in an office of some kind, you've seen one of his photographs. But what he used his photographs for was, again, in the same way that Bierstadt used his paintings or Moran used his paintings, and that is to create a sense of awe in the viewer. Where is this place? How, this place is so beautiful. And then when you find out, well, this is threatened by, a mine or a logging operation, or, some other thing that's going to destroy it, the public perception begins to go, oh, wait, we can't do that. That's such a beautiful place. And so, he's thinking on these same lines too. We all know the tragedy of the Dust Bowls, the cruel and unforgivable erosions of the soil, the depletion of fish or game, and the shrinking of the noble forests. And we know that such catastrophes shrivel the spirit of the people. The wilderness is pushed back. Man is everywhere. Solitude, so vital to the individual man, is almost nowhere. He also, by the way, revolutionized photography. He had a system of different grades of light to dark that he used to create his iconic black and white photographs. And again, going kind of back to the emotional impact of it with romanticism. I go out into the world with my camera and come across something that excites me emotionally, spiritually, or aesthetically. I see the image in my mind's eye. I take the photograph and print it as the equivalent of what I saw and felt. And if you can feel something, the reason that we're here, that we care about the outdoors and about nature, is because we feel something when we are there. And we want the youth that we work with to feel that same thing. Art is a fantastic tool for that. It's called pathos, appealing to the emotions, to change behavior, to change perceptions. There are other authors out there that use their writing as well. Edward Abbey, you've probably heard of. It says, wilderness is not a luxury, but a necessity of the human spirit, and is vital to our lives as water and good bread. A civilization which destroys what little remains of this wild, or of the wild, despair of the original, is cutting itself off from its origins and betraying the principle of civilization itself. And then later on, one of my favorite authors, with a strong connection here in Utah, particularly at the University of Utah, in the 1960s, there is a growing push for conservation and for an act of Congress to set aside areas as designated wilderness areas. This has a lot to do with some of the controversies over the dams being built. Glen Canyon Dam is a great example of this. And Wallace Stegner, a great author about Western issues, about wilderness, about nature, he writes a letter to Congress. And this is what he says in this letter. It's a beautiful piece of literature. He says, these are some of the things wilderness can do for us. That is the reason we need to put into effect for its preservation some other principle than the principles of exploitation or usefulness or even recreation. We simply need that wild country available to us, even if we never do more than drive to its edge and look in, for it can be a means of reassuring ourselves of our sanity as creatures, a part of the geography of hope. That's actually the phrase that I used as the title for this presentation, because that really is what defined the United States for pretty much all of its history up to this point, is that geography of hope, the hope of the wilderness to the west, the hope of a new start to the west, the hope that of nature, and at this same token here, we talked about all this vast public land that we have, and how for example, I have never been to Alaska, but I would love to go to Alaska. And to me, this last part right here, the fact that so much of Alaska is wild and preserved, gives me hope, and it reassures me that we, at least up to this point, have had some degree of self-control, that we can set apart and set aside, pieces of nature and land as places that have more value than just what dollar signs can produce. This is what he's talking about here, that sense of optimism and that hope that we can, as a species and as a society, place value on nature more than just what we need to get out of it. Well, in 1964, Congress does pass a Wilderness Act. And upon signing it, President Lyndon B. Johnson says, if future generations are to remember us with gratitude rather than contempt, we must leave them more than the miracles of technology. We must leave them a glimpse of the world as it was in the beginning, not just after we got through with it. And so today in the public lands, this is a map of the designated wilderness areas in the lower 48. We don't have Alaska, unfortunately, but Alaska counts. It very much counts. There's much there. But this is kind of what we've ended up with. Now, it's still a very hot button issue, let's say, here in the West, and it's more, as of late, become a much more hot button issue of whether we will continue to exercise self-control and good judgment when it comes to what we leave behind us. Will we leave the miracles of technology, or will we leave the beauty of nature so that others can experience the geography of hope? Will we be conservation minded? And that's the ending question, is where do we go from here? So throughout this, I mean, we've seen that the arts and the philosophy behind the things that drove our aesthetic preferences really were a very strong influence on where we've ended up today as far as conservation goes. Without Moran, without Bierstadt, without the aesthetic of romanticism, it may have turned out very, very differently. But it's created an emotional connection, and it emphasized the emotional and spiritual connection we have between ourselves and nature, and influenced our desire to preserve that and to conserve it for the future. So that's all I have for tonight. If anyone has any questions or anything, I'm happy to answer those. I know we're like right on the cusp of our time, and we just have a few announcements and stuff left to go, but I'd be happy to hear if anyone has some other questions. Yes, Howard Zahniser was another leader in advocacy for wilderness. Dave O'Leary put that down there. And in fact, Stegner wrote that letter, the Wilderness Letter, where that quote came from, on behalf of the Wilderness Society, which Howard Zahniser was the president of, and kind of the chief influencer for, or shoot, I'm trying to think of the word, lobbyist for the Wilderness Act. There we go. All right. I'm going to unshare my screen so we can go back to the end of the other presentation. But if you have any questions or comments or anything, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we can answer some after we get through our just remaining announcements as well. So let me share that bit again. I know that was a lot of stuff very quickly. Like I said, it's like 3 class periods that I put together and condensed down to this one thing. Okay. Let's go on to our regular announcements. First, take a look at our upcoming courses for Leave No Trace. So just kind of a little bit of an explanation of the benefit of becoming an instructor. I know many of you here are level 1 or level 2 instructors. We also have the skills courses available out there, but becoming an instructor is an opportunity to help spread your impact. You know, we talk about impact so much in a negative way when it comes to Leave No Trace and outdoor ethics, but think about it in the opposite way, how a good cumulative impact can be created. And one of the best cumulative impacts that we can create is spreading our influence through becoming instructors, giving kids that the proper tools and education to be environmental stewards. So here's a list of our upcoming courses right here. These are our level 2 courses. There's a good mix all around the country. We have one in kind of the central area at Northern Tier. We have several here in the West, including Oregon, California, and New Mexico, and then one back east at the Summit. So take a look at these. And if this is on your docket for the year, you know, I encourage you to go and experience that. If you have, if finances is a problem, please remember that we do have scholarships available. The Dan Howell Scholarship is available. And you can get this at the web page, which we'll look at in just a second. It's changing a little bit, but you can find information about this there. Dan Howell's fantastic instructor. He was my level 2 instructor at Philmont. Fantastic individual, and this is a great opportunity if money is a problem where you can get some help attending one of those courses. Also remember, we have Scouting for Clean Waterways. This is the website where you can go to find information about updates on Scouting for Clean Waterways. We just recently had a roundtable about that program. We also have the National Outdoor Conference coming up at Philmont in September. This is for both professionals and volunteers. We're going to have a good slate of courses and activities and things happening there. So if you are able to spend some time at Philmont in late September, beautiful time of year to go there. Please make the effort to go out there. So here's the registration. It's at scouting.org/outdoor-programs NOC. Now, speaking of the webpage, outdoorethics-bsa.org, the webpage that we have all come to know and love over the years is going away. Sort of. That address is going away. But all of the materials and things that have been put onto that website are being folded into the main scouting.org, and we're changing the address. So if you look right here, this is the new address on your screen, scouting-oec.org, Outdoor Ethics and Conservation. So scouting.oec.org. So all the stuff from Outdoor Ethics-BSA has been moved over there and is live. If you go to that site, it's just going to forward you to the new website. Mark has worked very, very hard on getting this transferred over. Let's give a hand to Mark and thank him for his hard work. If you have any questions, or if you find anything that is not quite right or needs to be fixed a little bit, you can reach him at this email address, webmaster@scouting-oec.org. All right. And as always, please send your photos of any nature or any courses that you do or conservation projects so that we can use them in Roundtable. You've seen a few of my photos have been put in here. I sent a bunch in, Paul stuck them in here, but we would love to have more. So please send your photos in to us. And this is where you can send them to, roundtable@scouting-oec.org. So again, all of the websites and the email addresses are conforming to the scouting-oec.org now. So roundtable@scouting.oec.org is now where you can send your communications regarding Roundtable. So any questions or comments or photos or anything like that. As always, feedback is a gift. Please continue to fill out the survey after the course at this website right here. I believe we're going to put that in the chat so that you can get that directly. But this helps us again to pick topics or to improve on things each month that we do this. After this roundtable is concluded, as with all of our other roundtables, they will be posted both on YouTube, and you can access them at scouting-oec.org/roundtable. As soon as we get this video edited and put up, that will be available for future reference. So you will always be able to go back and reference any of the presentations that we have had over the years. There have been some fantastic presentations. So you can go back and reference that. We will make it public. It usually takes about a week or so for things to get edited and put up there. But we'll make that public so that you know when you can go and find this recording should you want to go back and reference it again. And since this is May, we're going to take a break for the summer, and we'll see you at the beginning of the next program year. So watch your email. We'll send out details for when we are going to have the startup roundtables again, probably August. If not August, it will be September. But thank you immensely for being here, for being with us through the program year, and for all of your wonderful input and everything that you bring to the table for outdoor ethics and conservation in scouting and throughout the nation. So with that, we're concluded for the evening, and we'll leave it open for any questions or discussion or anything that you, if you'd like to linger and speak for a few minutes, we can go ahead and do that.